George Lucas didn't understand what Star Wars is and just contributed to its downfall. Okay, so from a standpoint, I can understand what this user means. I can see why someone would think that, and here's why. Hi everyone, I hope y'all are doing fine. So I've read some of the hot takes that you guys wrote to me under the previous episode, and I have to say that some of y'all really did understand the assignment. I've read some really controversial stuff under that video, and in today's episode, I'll react to some of these hot takes that I consider to be worthy of being analyzed. If you are new to this channel, hi, welcome. And if you want to support this small channel of mine, please consider subscribing to it. And now, enough yapping said, let's move on to our first hot take of the day. So our first hot take of the day comes from the user Adridento, who says, I don't want Disney adapting Legends lore, and I would prefer them to create original stuff for two reasons. One, it would give creators a better creative freedom, and two, it would stop butchering stories that are already established. So I completely agree with this take. Star Wars has been around for nearly 50 years at this point, and since then, the franchise has been expanding through additional storylines that are shared through books, comics, TV shows, spin-off movies, etc. When Disney bought Lucasfilm in 2012, they wanted to create brand new stories and build their own unified storyline. And so, hundreds of these stories became what we know nowadays as Legends. And the only projects that survived this rebrand are the movies and the Clone Wars show. Now, I honestly find it sad what Disney did to these stories, but nowadays, I think I moved on from it, and I accept that these stories are not considered canon anymore. But hey, like I said, Disney did this to create brand new stories, right? So they did the sequel trilogy, some spin-off TV shows and movies, and yeah. Unfortunately, they did adapt some of these older stories too, but not in the way that you would think. Instead of adapting storylines, they borrowed elements from these stories such as characters, concepts, and plot points. So, what was the point of rebranding Star Wars if they were going to reuse these Legends elements anyway? I'm all for creating brand new stuff, but using already established elements is just a strategy that I find lazy, and just there to build up hype surrounding these projects and to attract older fans too. And yeah, Disney did create original stories, let's not lie here. So they're not completely in the wrong. But the Star Wars franchise overall is a very tricky subject because of how divided its fandom is. There are fans that are around since the first Legends books appeared, and there are fans that were born during the time the prequels were released, like myself. And so not every fan of this franchise has the same vision of what stories should be touched or not. And I can see why some people would like Legend stories to be adapted on screen or completely remade. But honestly, there's a risk that Disney butchers these projects and that it ends up ruining the reputation that this older story had. And so, instead of relying on the past, I think Disney should create brand new stories and give a chance to inspiring artists and creators, which is what I think will make the franchise stay alive. And so yeah, I agree with this first hot take. And so our second hot take of the day comes from the user Pierre Bilger, who says, the prequels are the best Star Wars trilogy because they're the only ones that go beyond good guys versus bad guys. They tell political stories with far more complex stakes than the original trilogy and the sequels. Okay, so I strongly disagree with this statement. I gotta give it to this user though. The prequels do go beyond just good guys versus bad guys and explore more complex stakes and storylines. So does the original trilogy and the sequels. The original trilogy is mainly a story about family and redemption. Luke Skywalker discovers the galaxy and its mysteries. And while doing that, he also discovers who his father really is and learns to not fall to the dark side, like his father did. Darth Vader ends up finding the one thing that could pull him out of the dark side. his love for his children. And this entire trilogy takes place during a time when an evil empire has full control over the galaxy, and when a rebellion starts fighting back. And so the original trilogy is also a story about a family during a dark time for the entire galaxy. Now what about the sequels? Well, there are also stories about a character who self-discovers herself during a time when the galaxy faces an emerging threat, the First Order. So yeah, even if I don't like the sequel trilogy, I have to defend it here. Now what differentiates these trilogies from one another is how much they dive into these political issues. The prequels do go very deep into these political matters, more than the sequels did, and arguably more than the original trilogy did. But does that mean that they're the best trilogy just because of that? Absolutely not. It all depends on what story they tell and on your personal preferences. Personally, I think the original trilogy is the best Star Wars trilogy because of the profound journey these characters go through, because of how interesting the period of time is, and because of the strong messages these stories tell. If you like the prequels more because they're more political, then good for you. You found what you like to watch the most. But I don't think we should judge an entire trilogy based on how complex its environment is. I think we should judge it by how good and interesting the story is. Yeah, the Republic era is pretty complex and interesting, but in my opinion, the prequels' main storyline is less enjoyable than the OT's one, and so I strongly disagree with this user's take. Now for our third hot take of the day, we have user EngiPug, if I pronounce it correctly, who says, A New Hope is better than The Empire Strikes Back. The first 40 minutes of TESB could have moved way faster, and it kind of feels like 2 or 3 episodes of a TV show, whereas in A New Hope, the magic just doesn't stop spreading. Honestly, I see the vision that this user has. I thought very hard about what to think of this, and I've come to the conclusion that I agree with this statement. Now, hot take alert, but I've always found The Empire Strikes Back to be overrated. It's good, but people put this movie too much on a pedestal. I think that TESB is more a movie with interesting ideas and memorable moments, whereas A New Hope tells a more concrete story, but has less memorable moments. When this user says that TESB feels like a couple of episodes put together, I can understand why they say that, because of all these different stories that develop independently and that end up merging at the end. It's a different story pattern than the one in A New Hope, because in A New Hope, it's the journey of Luke Skywalker discovering the galaxy and joining the rebellion. A straightforward journey. Personally, I like the global story of A New Hope more, because I enjoy the way it evolves, whereas in TESB, it follows less of a straight line and diverges in different directions. Again, it's a matter of personal preferences here, but I agree with this hot take. And honestly, there's also a side of me that finds A New Hope less rewatchable than The Empire Strikes Back, because it has less memorable moments than TESB. But personally, I'm more the kind of guy who will watch stuff for their global story. So because of that, I think I also like A New Hope more. So our fourth hot take of the day comes from the user Isaac Rando, who says, Rebels is better than The Mandalorian, and The Mandalorian is just a bunch of overforming and hype moments that only work during the first watch. Okay, so I disagree with this statement. As much as I love Rebels, I have to say that I don't like it more than The Mandalorian, and I also don't believe that The Mandalorian is just a show made to make its main character overform 24/7. I think the first season of The Mandalorian tells a more emotional story, with Mando discovering Grogu and becoming attached to him, while the audience discovers the world of bounty hunting. In the second season, the story merges more with the storylines from previous Star Wars projects, while the audience discovers a bit more about Mandalorians and Grogu. And from then on, I can see why this user would find the show to be more about horror farming and hype moments, but I still think it's very enjoyable. And the third season? Well, now, that's where it becomes more of a mess for me, by bringing in boring storylines and not exploring Mandalore as much as they could. Rebels, on the other hand, is honestly very good from the start to the end, but it's a kids show with stretched storylines that were just stretched because Disney needed to fill their TV spots. Yeah, this show has great storylines and character arcs, but to say that it is better than The Mandalorian just because it has less hype moments is just wrong in my opinion. Both of these shows bring something different to the Star Wars universe. And I don't think The Mandalorian is just about hyping up the audience, so I disagree. Now our fifth hot take of the day comes from the user Sam Post Production, who says George Lucas didn't understand what Star Wars is and just contributed to its downfall. Okay, so from a standpoint, I can understand what this user means. I myself do not entirely agree with this statement, but honestly, I can see why someone would think that, and here's why. Star Wars is a franchise with an infinite amount of possible stories to be told from, because of the uniqueness of its world. When the first Star Wars movie originally hit the movie theaters, long before it was renamed Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope, the story of Star Wars was about a young farmer who discovers the Force and the galaxy by joining a rebellion that fights off an evil empire. And from then on, the story evolved into a story involving a family and ended up becoming more about its main antagonist than its main protagonist. Instead of telling the story of Luke Skywalker, the prequels made this franchise more about the journey of Anakin Skywalker into becoming Darth Vader and ending up having some kind of redemption. That's the vision that George Lucas had while writing the prequels, which is clearly different than the original vision that he had while writing A New Hope. But is it necessarily a bad thing? Absolutely not. When this user says that George didn't understand what Star Wars is, I don't think they're necessarily right, because Star Wars evolved through his writing and his vision, and because it's such a big world with infinite amounts of possible roads it could have gone, I think that at the end of the day, it's all about what people make of this franchise. Yeah, the creator's vision is important in a piece of art, but at the end of the day, I think it's more about the viewer's reception and what you think of it as an audience. If the creator and the fan don't see a piece of art the same way, then who's right? The creator or the fan? Depending on what kind of Star Wars fan you are, you will see this franchise differently. For example, there will be people who will see the Star Wars franchise as some kind of David versus Goliath story, with the rebellion fighting off the evil empire. But there will also be people who will see this franchise more as the journey of Anakin Skywalker, like George Lucas envisioned it. It's kind of like a situation similar to Joker here, where the audience didn't understand the movie the way the creators intended it to be understood. But the truth is, in my opinion, Star Wars can be seen in many different ways. And should we really fight over which vision is the real one when they can all coexist together? At the end of the day, Star Wars is a piece of art left for the viewers to make up their own mind about it. George saw this franchise one way, but that doesn't mean that you can't see it another way. Now, by changing his vision of the franchise after growing an audience, I can agree that George did contribute to its downfall. As much as I love what he did with this franchise, there will be purists fans who will criticize the way the franchise changed, because it's not about what they thought it was about anymore. Usually, evolution is a great thing, but Star Wars did not evolve the way it should have, I think. The franchise was a bit downplayed by making it all about a family, if you get what I mean. And by doing that, George lost some fans, and Star Wars developed a more negative reputation in early 2000s. But the love for the franchise came back with the fans who grew up watching the prequels, because they grew up watching this franchise the way George envisioned it while writing the prequels. But as you can see, these two fandoms don't necessarily agree with everything concerning this franchise, and I think that's what contributed to the downfall of this franchise. This separation within the fandom. And when Disney came in, I don't think they helped this matter get better. And so I disagree that George didn't understand what Star Wars is about. But I do agree that by seeing it differently, he contributed to its downfall. Now for our sixth hot take of the day, we have user Joaquim Senescal, who says Episodes 7 and 8 don't contradict themselves, they complete each other by bringing two different points of view on Star Wars. Nostalgia and continuity on the one hand, and a complete rupture on the other hand. Okay, so I disagree with this statement. I don't think they complete each other. On the contrary, I think they clash with each other. On the one hand, you have J.J. Abrams' vision of the sequel trilogy, where he was trying with Episode 7 to build a story about mystery and legacy, whereas Rian Johnson just threw all of those ideas away to make the sequels about character growth and deconstruction. Both directors had a different vision of what this trilogy should be about, and Rian's ideas for Episode 8 did not complete J.J.'s ideas from Episode episode 7. He just decided to redirect the characters' journeys and where the story was going. So it's not a kind of clash that completes two movies. On the contrary, it's a kind of clash that tries to redirect where this franchise was going at. And so no, I don't think episode 7 and 8 complete each other. And now for our final hot take of the day, we have user Gay Venus, LMAO, who says, the book of Boba Fett isn't so bad. Honestly, if you would have told me this back in 2021 when this show was airing, I think I would have actually agreed with you. But looking back at it nowadays, I'd say that I would be wrong thinking this. I think every bit of negative criticism given to this show is absolutely deserved. Yeah, Boba Fett doesn't feel like Boba Fett. The pacing is slow. The stakes aren't very high. The focus wasn't always on what it was supposed to be about. Anyway, I think the only two reasons why I enjoyed this show was, first off, my curiosity surrounding where the story was going for Boba Fett, and second, the story following Mando and Grogu after the events of The Mandalorian Season 2. I think these two episodes where Mando and Grogu are the spotlight are some of my favorite content from the Star Wars universe. But when you think about it, it's very weird to like the episodes of a Boba Fett show where Boba Fett isn't even present. I mean, to me, that alone highlights some of the biggest flaws of this show. And even though I find some of its scenes cool and memorable, like Cad Bane's apparition, I think this show was not very well constructed and was carried by its fan service. I had a fun time discovering this show for the first time, but when it finally ended, was I satisfied by it? Absolutely not. And so, I have to disagree with this user's take. And so, what did you guys think of these hot takes? With which one did you agree? I want to hear what you guys have to say in the comment section down below. For the next episode, I'll ask you guys what your biggest Harry Potter hot takes are. So if you want to share with me your biggest hot takes surrounding this franchise, please respond to my pinned comment. And if there's not enough comments about Harry Potter, well, I guess I'll have to do a third episode about Star Wars. If you guys want to support this small channel of mine, don't forget to subscribe to it. And if you enjoyed or hated this video, make sure to leave a like or dislike. I send you guys all my love and hope to see you in the next one. See y'all.